material present in this video are in public domain and free to use. Chapter 3. The country and its people. Before we go farther with this story of the Philippines, let us look, for a little while, at the country itself, and the people who live in it. Men who are wise in science tell us that there must have been in the Pacific Ocean, some thousands of years ago, a great body of land that has now sunk out of sight. We do not know when it sank, but after it did so there must have been, one after another, a great many volcanic eruptions that broke up the sunken continent into smaller tracts of land. Many of these eruptions took place underwater, and with the overflow of lava the separate tracts grew larger. Later still this sunken land began slowly to rise from the sea. In some places this change is still going on. New islands have come up out of the sea within the memory of people who are still alive. And there have been, within modern times, great changes on some of the Philippine Islands. The whole group is of volcanic origin, but there are now very few active volcanoes left in the country. Of these Mayon, in the southern part of Luzon, is the largest. This is said to be the most beautiful volcano in the world. Its form is a perfect cone. Taal volcano, which is on an island in Lake Bombon, is also a famous volcano. There are over 1,200 islands in the archipelago, but we do not know exactly how many there are. They have never been counted. Some of them are hardly more than bits of rock showing above the sea. While Luzon, the largest, is 480 miles long, on all of the islands there are large mountains. Great peaks rise, in some cases to a height of 7,000 or 8,000 feet, covered to the very top with forests of mighty trees. The finest building timber in the world will someday come from these islands. Teak, ebony, mahogany, and cedar trees grow here, besides rubber and camphor trees, and many others for which there is great demand in all the markets of the world. Fine fruit trees of many sorts are also found, when there are good roads in the islands over which to haul logs, and modern mills and machinery to make them into lumber. The timber trade of the Philippines will be a great industry. There are now about 8 million of people in the Philippines. How many were here when the Spanish came we do not know. The larger part of the people in the islands are of the Malay Mala race. These were not the first dwellers in the country, but came from the Malay Peninsula, and it is likely that they had not been here more than 200 or 300 years when the Spanish came. They are the people whose lives and acts make up most of what we call the history of the islands. And they are the people usually meant by the term Filipinos. Up in the mountains, living in nearly as wild a state as when the Spanish came, we still find the Aborigines. This is a word which means the first dwellers in a country. It is thought that the first people who lived in the northern islands were the Eaters, or Negritos, a race called the Indonesians. Indonesians are the Aborigines of the great island of Mindanao. The Negritos are dying out. They are a small, timid people, with thick lips and flat noses. Their hair is like curly wool. They hunt and fight with bows and arrows, and are very quick and active. Their chief food is fish, and the brown mountain rice which they plant and harvest even if taken when children and brought up in a city. They do not grow to like civilized life, but run away and go back to the mountains as soon as they have the chance. An important tribe of wild people in these islands are the Igorots, of whom there are many on Luzon. The Igorots are the finest and strongest of all the wild tribes in the country. They are very brave, and are good fighters. using in warfare a short, broad knife, which they wield with deadly skill. They never submitted to the Spaniards, and were badly used by that people. The Spaniards always made war upon them, and at one time tried to put an end to all of the tribe in Luzon. They burned their villages and killed all who fell in their power. They could not conquer them, however, and the Igorots have always hated the Spanish fiercely. The civilized Filipino people spring from none of these wild tribes. As we have said, they are Malays, and came here from the Great Malay Peninsula. The Malays, from earliest times, were a sea-going folk, daring sailors, and skillful in managing their boats. They went boldly to sea in tiny crafts, with only the stars to guide them, taking risks such as no Europeans dared to take. They overran the islands of the South Pacific, going even as far as the island of Madagascar. They settled in the Philippines, drove the natives back into the mountains, and made their homes along the coasts and on the rich plains. They had a written alphabet of their own when the Spanish came, and were far ahead, even then, of the native races. The Malays who settled in the island of Mindanao were converted to the Muslim faith by some Arabian missionaries who came to that island as early as the 12th or 13th century. From Mindanao this religion was carried to the island of Sulu, and it is now the faith of the people of the entire Sulu archipelago. The people who held to this religion were called Moros by the Spanish, and by this name they are still known. There are many tribes in the islands, both of the Aborigines and of the Malay people. In early days these tribes were more separate than at present, and had little to do with one another, save when there was war among them. Each had its own language, and even now a great many dialects are spoken in the islands. This fact, among others, has helped to keep the tribes apart and to prevent them from becoming a strong, united people. We see, from what has been said, that the dwellers in the Philippine Islands are not strictly a people in the sense that the Spanish or the English are a people. Even the Malay folk in the islands have been, from the very first, split up into many tribes, having little in common. Under some methods of government these tribes might have been united, but Spanish rule was not of a sort to bind them together. Rather, it set tribes against one another, and used some to help conquer others. It did not draw them together in a strong national life such as has made the United States of America a great and powerful nation. The United States has been settled by people from many countries. These people have gone to America from nearly every nation on Earth. But the different races have become one strong American people by reason of a common interest in the good government of their country, and a common desire for its welfare. Each state has its own life and government, but all are united to form the great country of which each is a part, and to support the federal government which binds the states together. When the Filipino people have learned thus to stand together, a new day will dawn for these islands, when the people all speak one language, and when young and old can read and write that language. The country will be more united, and will begin to know something of that national life which other countries enjoy. The people will then be united. They will know how to govern their land wisely and justly. They will understand, as they have not done before, the relation one nation bears to others in the world, and will be able to develop the great wealth of their country. The two great tribes of Malay Filipinos are the Tagals and the Visayans. The Tagals live in southern Luzon. The Visayans in the group of islands called the Visayas, which lie south of Luzon and north of Mindanao. There are, besides, many lesser peoples in the islands, so that, as we have seen, There could be no common national life. The tribes were governed by great chiefs or kings, who ruled through small chiefs and datos. Each of these was at the head of about 100 families whom he stood for in the tribal council, and for whom he was spokesman before the great chief. The small chief was called the head of 100. It was a simple, but effective, form of government, and suited the people. Legazpi and Salcedo made no changes in it, except to declare the King of Spain the ruler of all the tribes. They had the great chiefs swear loyalty to Spain, and then left them to govern for the king. Among the Moros of Mindanao and Sulu there are still in use words that were obsolete in the Arabic in the time of Muhammad. Later, however, when Legazpi and Salcedo were gone, many evils crept in. The great chiefs were put out of power, and little by little self-government was taken from the people. They came at last to have no voice in the ordering of their own lives, and no one to speak for them to their unknown ruler in Spain. Summary. The Philippine Islands are believed to be part of a great continent that once lay in the South Pacific Ocean. This continent sank. Afterwards a slow upheaval brought the islands up from the sea. The Eaters, or Negritos, were the earliest inhabitants of the country. The Indonesians of Mindanao are also Aborigines. The Igorots are a wild tribe of Luzon and the Visayas, who have from the first been enemies of Spain. The Spanish treated them cruelly and won their hatred. The civilized Filipinos are of Malay origin, and came here from the Malay Peninsula. Those who settled in Mindanao were converted to the Mohammedan faith in the 12th or 13th century by Arabian missionaries, and they are called Moros. The people of the islands are broken up into many tribes, and this has hindered their becoming a united people. The tribal form of government was simple, and so well suited to the country that Legazpi made little change in it. The Spanish who came after him, however, took all self-government from the people. Questions. What are we taught of the origin of the Philippine Islands? Who are the Aborigines? What is the origin of the civilized Filipinos? How did the Muslim faith come into the country? Describe the early form of government.